So the Lexington Lyceum Advocates mission is to create a modern Lyceum, history learning center, and inclusive community gathering space in the Ellen Stone building. And if you're not familiar with that, we have a picture. On the second floor of this lovely building, there is an actual historic Lyceum. When it opened in 1833, it was part of a large and growing Lyceum movement in the United States, which was intended to both foster adult learning and also to help strengthen our fledgling democracy by creating more informed voters. With a modern Lyceum, which would focus on events like the one we're having tonight, our hope is to both give a nod to the building's past and to the important conversations that once occurred there, and also allow all of us to engage in conversations like the one tonight on civil discourse that are important to the town and the nation today. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator, who is probably familiar to many of you in this room, Reggie Gibson. Reggie is a Reggie is a literary performer who has lectured and performed widely. He's a Brother Thomas Fellow and has received multiple Massachusetts Cultural Council awards and Boston Foundation grants. He served as a consultant for The Mere Distinction of Color, an exhibit at James Madison's Montpelier home that focused on American slavery and the U.S. Constitution. He also serves on the boards of the New England Poetry Club, Grub Street Writers, and LexMedia, which is filming here tonight. And he teaches at Clark University. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Reggie to get our conversation started. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you, everyone, for being here. This is an important night whenever citizens can get together and speak with one another with civility, and let's hope that that is what will happen tonight. With civility is always a great day because we prove that democracy can and does indeed work, even during trying times like this. But we're going to play a game now, which I love to play, which is called Take Your Cell Phone Out and Turn It Off. Being a teacher, I'll model it. This is what I'm doing as we speak. So please do the same so that we can have unimpeded civil discourse tonight. I want to thank the Lexington Lyceum for convening this. This needs to happen a lot more often throughout our country. And also, it's not just the Lexington Lyceum that convened it. It is also sponsored by the Lexington Observer and the Lexington Human Rights Committee. Can we give them all a round of applause, please? We are going to have an expert panel that is going to speak with you about differing ideas, but all of those ideas are going to somehow come together to talk about what it means for us to have civil discourse. I love the title, Why Can't We Talk to Each Other? Right? Which is a deep, profound question. Why can't we talk to each other? Why can't we talk to each other? Why can't we talk to each other? Right? Depending upon where we put that emphasis will determine how we receive what that is being said. So we want to look at extremism, polarization, bias, and our town. And we're going to have 4 presentations with that, and I'll get us started because, again, we are very close and up against it with time. And by the way, to the panelists, I just want to say that we have Rosemary in the back. She is going to be the time shark. So if you see Rosemary waving in the back, this colored pads, you'll know that that's her saying something to them that they should get to their final profound point of the many profound points they're going to make tonight and bring us home. So our first up is a dynamic duo who have gone into the hells that is high school teaching. And they are going to speak with us about how to do this thing. The first is going to be two together. Catherine Manning in her 16th year as a world history teacher at Lexington High School, and she has the marks to prove it. In her time at LHS, she has taught World History 2 and AP History, World History, and served as Model UN Advisor for 8 years. And she is teaming up with Carrie Dunn, who has an educational doctorate and is in her 2nd year as the History and Social Studies Department head at Lexington High School, where she is currently currently teaching 10th grade modern world history. Now, prior to coming to this wonderful town that is Lexington, she was a social studies department head in Weston, and she was a K-12 social studies director in Boston and in Arlington, and a history teacher at Framingham High School, where she comes to us tonight. So will you please give a round of applause for Catherine and Karen.
I'm on first. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Reggie. And I don't know if we're experts. I think we're always still learning. That's the biggest lesson here. But thank you for having Catherine and I tonight. All right. We're going to share our time here. Right. So I was researching what to talk about in my limited intro here, and I came across in an article by academic historian and most importantly, former high school English teacher Clint Smith, and he started an article with a quote from James Baldwin, who was presenting to a group of teachers in 1963. And James Baldwin said, "Let's begin by saying we are living through a very dangerous time." So the more things change, the more they stay the same. And Clint Smith, who is, again, a really well-respected current historian, highly recommend his recent books, right, and articles. He goes on to talk about why we need to teach and talk about tough topics with students and with everyone. And he says that the frame we need to take with students and young people is that we need to talk about tough, difficult paradigms, past and present, in the world so that they can reshape the world into a better place in the future, right? And take that kind of optimistic, like we're doing this hard thing now so that this can be a better place for all of us in the future, right? I think it's really good advice and a frame from which to look at how we talk about and teach about tough topics, right? And have those conversations and why we have those conversations and why we teach about these things. The question is how we do it. And it's not easy. It's definitely not one size fits all, right? It's heavily reliant on teaching being more of an art than a science, right? And good judgment and the nuance of every classroom, every group of people, every topic being the key, right? We've had some real progress and good fortune and success, I think, although it's never wrapped up with a bow, finished, right? Right, when discussing issues that are tough issues, right, and really personal issues related to immigration and immigration status, LGBTQ plus identities, right, race and ethnicity and identity, and we've had good luck with openness in conversations in our classrooms on these topics, right, with an emphasis and a frame of drawing on personal experience and identity. And the frame of the conversation is sharing. And we're pretty explicit that we're not debating, right? Because high school students love to debate, right? And they'll go right to debate unless they're told something is not a debate, right? We're just hearing other people's stories and experiences and perspectives, even if we don't agree with them. Right, but right now we're in a really particularly tough situation, maybe one of the toughest I've been through as a teacher, honestly, in terms of teaching history and social studies, and a piece of that is teaching current issues and what's going on in the world, no matter what history or social studies course you're teaching, right? And right now, with the situation in Israel, and I'll offer my condolence and empathy to anyone who is personally or emotionally connected, right, to this topic. Right now, teaching about this is as hard as it gets, right? And teaching in this time is as hard as it gets. And some of the rules we usually play by just don't work right now, right? And really, the principle we are operating from in our department right now is that above all else, it's like a first do no harm approach, right? Don't let our kids hurt each other, right? And I worry right now, quite honestly, and my department knows this, that right now, right in this moment today, unmoderated and even moderated open discourse can bring some harm on this topic, right? So what we are doing in our classrooms right now is some direct instruction on this topic by teachers, because we do figure that all kids need to know about what's going on in the world and some history. And we're allowing for as much as possible individual student reflection in a way that's private, that's seen by their teacher, right? But not necessarily shared with other students right now. And that's okay, that's getting us through this tough moment, right? But ultimately, I go back to what Clint Smith said. And I think in our schools, in our nation, in our world, we are going to need to be able to talk about things in order to make them better, right? And we're not there yet, but I hope we will be, right? So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Catherine, who is a wonderful history teacher. So we definitely want to hear what she's been doing in her classroom.
I'll echo what Carrie said. I definitely feel like there is an underlying anxiety that we are all feeling pretty much every day. And it wasn't until I was in a mentor training on Friday and the great leader of mentors gave us a moment to stop and pause and have connections that a lot of us started for the first time to really feel what we've been carrying. Making sure, to Carrie's point, that we're doing no harm, that school is a safe place for our kids to be with each other and to ask questions and to process what's going on. But what I wanted to share with all of you is that there is great work happening in Lexington Public Schools around academic conversations, which I think is really kind of what we're doing in our school to prepare kids to engage in productive civil discourse outside of school. From the kindergarten level all the way through 12th grade, kids are being given the structures and skills they need to have productive civil conversations. Jeff Zweers' work, he has work even to how to have academic conversations in a math classroom. He's written books about parenting, which I probably should pick up and add to my bookshelf, but has done work on academic conversations. So at Fisk, Catherine Murphy has been running PD with our English language learners, and I co-teach an English language section at the high school, giving all kids the sentence starters, the questions to ask, modeling what an academic conversation looks like for all kids. So one of the first things kids are being told when they're in a conversation with somebody else is, so what I hear you saying is, so restating what they think they hear and give the other person an opportunity to clarify. Right? So kids are doing this at kindergarten. At the kindergarten level, these are kids that are newcomers to Lexington Public Schools, and they're practicing how to have an academic conversation, working on how to pose questions, how to evaluate and compare, how to clarify, ask clarifying questions, and also how to clarify what they're saying, how to support their statements with evidence by giving them sentence frames, by giving them talk moves. And these are being used at the kindergarten level, and I teach 9th grade humanities at the social studies section of our 9th grade humanities, and we're using these same talk moves in 9th grade. So it's that consistency in giving kids the skills and structure to have these tough conversations. The other thing that's happening at the high school that I think is really important, besides modeling what it looks like, showing kids historians discussing topics, discussing the Armenian genocide, discussing British industrialization and discussing imperialism, but hearing historians having productive academic conversations, showing them what professionals doing this work look like, because otherwise sometimes the only conversations they're hearing is in a classroom environment. So what does that look like at the higher level? But another job that Carrie and I were talking about is the importance of curating sources so that all kids, it's a democratic classroom, because you can't have a civil discourse when some kids know a lot about a topic and other kids know nothing. It creates a power structure. It creates one kid kind of talking down or talking at another kid. So creating a variety of sources, a variety of perspectives, a variety of different publications, giving all kids access to those resources, before having that conversation. The other thing that I think is really important, and you touched on this, is classroom climate. You have to build relationships with the kids. And I think that's true in a community sense as well. You have to see the other person as a human, as an equal. You have to understand where they're coming from and what they're bringing to the conversation. So to Carrie's point, when we're talking about the Hamas-Israel war, when we just had a discussion in my class around Kashmir, we talk about world religions. I have the kids reflect on what they're bringing to the conversation before we even start. What is your worldview? What is your perspective that you're bringing to the conversation? How might that shape how you hear, how you listen to things, and how you're going to respond, what emotions you might feel? So being prepared before the conversation, but as a teacher, not just the kids participating, but also the teacher. We need to be, who are the kids that we're going to need to do, we need to do check-ins with before? Who are we going to need to check in after? So all of that stuff is happening K through 12 to make sure that kids are being given the space and the skills and the structure and the scaffold to have productive conversations. And I am incredibly impressed with my 9th graders this year. I don't know what they're doing at the middle school, but whatever it is remarkable. We had a discussion on the use of hard power in Kashmir, and the kids were just so respectful. It was a productive conversation, and each kid left leaving with something new, a new perspective, a new way to think about the topic. And the last thing I will say is cite your sources. And that's another thing that kids are learning. You have to tell us where you're getting your information from, and it's never more important than now. Where are you getting that talking point? Where are you getting your information from, and being a critical consumer of those sources? So all of that stuff is happening at the high school. We're no experts, but we're trying to do it. And in your point, in some ways, the current events are forcing our hand, and we have to do it now. And even if it's a little clunky, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do the work. So that's what I have to share.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Carrie, especially for reminding us, Catherine, that the need to talk about tough subjects, and that maybe that means we have to move out of our comfort zones when it comes to speaking about those things. And also for letting us, the modeling part I found was really, really important, about watching people who actually do this work, to how they speak with each other, and the idea of repeating what someone else has said so you understand that you mean them, so that you don't straw man their argument, but you steel man their argument and understand them completely. And then we can move forward and see if we can build on knowledge from there. Thank you both for that. And also, the thing about worldview, the narratives that we already have structured in our brains that we bring to something when we hear it, shapes how it is we understand it, and then it shapes our response. And that's great for us to be reminded of. Thank you both for the work you're doing in high schools. Our next presenter has decades-long experience in Lexington public affairs. Notably, he is the founder and moderator of the Lexington List, a local online forum. He chaired the board of LexMedia from 2006 to 2011. And he serves in Lexington Town Meeting. He retired from an extensive career designing web-based information systems at BB&N and also CMGI, Level 3 Communications, MIT Lincoln Labs, and other firms. Will you please welcome Harry Forsdick.
Well, I brought my own timer here, so I do have my cell phone on.
So Rosemary won't jump on you.
I hope not. Well, I'm Harry Forsdick. I've been involved in developing computer-mediated communication systems for my entire career. And although we may talk face-to-face tonight, I bet an awful lot of you will in the future and are already talking screen to screen. And I think it's important to keep in mind that whatever we come up with has to also work in that environment. And so I am biased towards the computer being involved in these conversations. And so I'll talk about what I've encountered and learned from running the Lexington List for 21 years. I formed the Lexington List in 2002. At first, it was about 10 or 15 of my friends who all had Adams Russell, the first internet provider in Lexington, and we gradually increased our connectivity over time. And I'll tell you a little more about how that list developed in a while, but it now has about, I think at last count, it has at least 2,000 people in Lexington on that list. And hopefully no one who doesn't live in Lexington. And that'll be another topic I have, not for any particular exclusionary reason, but for a good reason. So I was trying to think, well, what is it that I've learned in the 20 years that I've been running this list from the sort of, this is data on Lexington residents. In other words, how do they behave in a social conversation environment? Granted, it's one that's attenuated by the fact that they have to type it through their keyboard or even speak it through their, not in my case, but in certainly they extend it into Zoom, but by and large, it's words that are in their head and they have an opportunity to type them into a computer. So I thought of what are the ground rules, what are the things that I've encountered about these systems. First of all, and I'll just list the topics I'm going to talk about. First of all, there's the issue of ground rules. And I'll talk a little bit about what the qualities need to be of ground rules. Second one has to do with no anonymity. And I'll talk about one of my pet peeves, and I had an article or a letter in the Globe recently about that. And the third topic will be how you have to be active and prompt and monitor and enforce the rules of your group. And I use the word rules, it's a rather harsh word, but I understand what it means. I'm an MIT grad, so you'll have to excuse me. And then I'll talk a little bit about, I think some of the mechanisms for online computer-controlled conversations are based in things like email. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I view that. And then finally, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Lexington list and how it evolved over time. So my advice for ground rules is, first of all, to keep the set of goals and the set of rules of the conversation as small as possible and keep their interpretation as simple and unambiguous as possible. Because those last two, simple and unambiguous, will help you a lot, because it means there won't be an awful lot of diversity in when you say something. In other words, people will interpret it different ways, and you'd be surprised when you ask somebody, why did you do this, of all the weaseling and angles and opinions as to what that word meant. So I've learned my lesson the hard way. Most of my lessons I've learned the hard way, by the way. It's difficult to come up with a small number of rules that will not scare people away. So if you put too many constrictions on what we consider to be a free-form conversation, hi Reggie, how you doing today? And how long that can take, and what I have to call it, try to call you Reginald? If you put too many rules, it'll interfere with people's habitual talents that they've developed, which is talking to each other. And if you start limiting that too much, you're going to find that an awful lot of things don't get said. So I'm a big one for believing, understand the mechanism that you're trying to control or rule. Understand what their emotions are like, and that they have to occasionally be able to emote in a way that is not going to harm the entire conversation. And if I don't get some water, I'm going to dry out here. My fault. And then the third item on ground rules is plan to tune those rules with small changes as experience with the topic and the participants. And it's both the topics as well as who are the people involved in this discussion. And you need to understand that you will have to tune those things over time. You can't get it right the first time around. And I certainly have, in the beginning, I used to changed the acceptable use policy of the Lexington list frequently as I've gotten along and older and a little less involved in running this list. I've relaxed a little bit, but I keep saying to myself, someday I need to go and revise the acceptable use policy to build in all the things that have been said to the group. Now, I say it to a group of email users, but you could just as easily say it to any other group that is engaged in a somewhat routinized method of interacting with each other. Okay, so my biggest issue has to do with anonymity. And I believe that in order to keep civility in a list, there is no such thing as anonymity allowed in the group. You can't come into a group unless you're willing to stand up and say something and then have your reputation be influenced by what you say, and they have to know who you are. And so, for example, the recent thing in Lexington where there was a somewhat anonymous petition started at, I don't know what it was, one of the websites. It turned out that none of the people who supposedly signed this list were ever identified by name. And furthermore, I discovered that the person who was promoting that list, who made posts to Lexington Paul Rel, which is another list I run too, had actually lied to me when he applied to join to it. And he gave his address as being the address of where the new lab space thing on Bedford Street is going up. And I challenged him on this, and I said, well, why did you do that? I mean, I do check these things. I didn't happen to check it when I approved him. Okay. Whoops. All right, I gotta speed it up. Anyway, this is actually the most important thing I want to say. And he told me that he didn't feel comfortable saying what he had to say, so he didn't want to indicate exactly where he lived. And so I said, well, where exactly do you live? He said, well, I won't tell you. I'll tell you approximately where I lived. I said, I'm sorry, that is not enough for this list. And I have kicked people off, and I frequently do kick people off the list because I discover that they gave me wrong information. They may go away, but I don't very often hear from them again, so they don't really protest too much. So the point I have is that what you say will have an impact on your reputation. Anything you say in a conversation will be associated with you. It helps you to be, then I often imagine a deficient part of email is that you don't have a picture of the person you're writing the email to in front of you. And that, in fact, wouldn't it be nice if when you typed in Harry Forsdick, you saw my face come up on your screen so you could at least get a little bit of connection with me as you were writing those nasty things to me. It will help you to be compassionate. I can guarantee you that. So I drove to Cambridge every day for 15 years with Ray Tomlinson, who was the initial developer of email on the ARPANET and the predecessor, which was the predecessor of the internet. And when asked years later after email was founded, I said, he's pretty famous for email. People would ask him, is there anything you wished you had added to the protocol way back when you started it? And he said, oh yes, there's one thing. I wish I had required an unbreakable protocol for correctly identifying the sender. And that was a real good indication. So I think if I had to sort of give you one piece of information, and one that I really come to talk about a lot, and as I say, there was a letter in the Globe that I questioned the authenticity of this supposed petition about people who were opposed to the curriculum in the school. I said, who were those people? And then I pointed out that none of their names are known, and that's when you see a petition with no name shown, you should question it. I think I have a lot of other stuff, but I think I will end with that. I'll end with one little quickly thing. People ask me, where did the Lexington Pol Rel list come from? Well, when I started the Lexington list, it had 10 members, and it had 25 after a month. And then maybe after a couple of more months, it might have had 50. But it was small potatoes compared to what you really need to keep a list like that alive. And then about 6 months, it might have had 500 people on it. But then I also noticed that there were times when the people would resign from the Lexington list. And I tried to figure out what was going on, and it turned out those were usually right after someone had posted and engaged in a long conversation, either about politics or religion. And so that's when I created a separate list, and that's when all the rules started coming into the Lexington list about no politics, no religion on the Lexington list. If you want, you can talk about that on the Lex Pol Rel list. And there's a different set of rules and a different set of people. They're not different. They're a subset of the entire list. But those people know how to behave. And they know who each other, it's a smaller group, so they know each other better. And they know who are the people who like to start things and who are the peacemakers. And it's a good example where familiarity, as in face-to-face, is much better for all of these things. But familiarity with electronic correspondence is really a helpful thing to keeping these conversations civil. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. One of the things I took away from that was to keep it simple, right? Keep it simple in a sense and unambiguous, as it allows for less misinterpretation and less miscommunication. Also to be flexible and tuning the rules to match what the folks who are on the list needs. And also, especially the dangers of anonymity, right? What it actually means to just be able to, as we used to say where I come from, let's not throw rocks and then hide our hands. Right? Let's not do that. Let's stand up, stand behind what it is that we have to say. And it's a funny thing, right? We being this member of this bipedal social species, if we keep ourselves nameless and formless and bloodless and personless when communicating, it allows us to attach those to other people. And therefore we forget that we're speaking to actual flesh and blood human beings who also have feelings and also wish to participate mightily in a democracy. So we let them stand up, let us stand up, and let us be a community. Thank you, Harry, for reminding us of that. Third up, our next presenter is a senior media, I was about to say meditator, but probably that too. But a senior mediator at the Consensus Building Institute and an associate director of the MIT Harvard Public Disputes Program. For 34 years, he has, 34 years? Damn. When I was 12. Damn. For 34 years, he has built consensus and enhanced collaboration capacity on complex public and organizational issues in the United States and other countries. Currently, he is focused on improving economic and social opportunity and strengthening democratic institutions in the United States. Who would ever think we would need to increase and strengthen democratic institutions in the United States? His recent work includes facilitating dialogue among members of Congress about the events of January 6th, 2021, helping leaders in the bridging movement enhance their impact through collaboration, crafting a shared vision and strategies for more constructive online discourse with leaders in social media industry, social and cognitive psychology, and journalism, the dude don't sleep, and working with nonprofit executives and conflict resolution practitioners to integrate bridging activities into volunteer and national service. Will you please give a round of applause for David Fairman.
Oh, please. Now that you've given the intro, I don't think I actually need to give the talk. But it's great to be here with you tonight. Thanks so much to the Lyceum folks and all the organizers. I want to say a little bit about polarization because I think the title of tonight's talk around civility might lead us a little bit astray. I just want to note that we have some real problems that civility will be necessary but not sufficient for addressing in terms of addressing the roots of our polarization. I want to say a little bit about the work that my organization and my field do as mediators and facilitators on public issues, and then just talk about some lessons that I think we're learning as we work with stakeholders on polarized issues at every level from local to national here, and maybe some things will be useful going forward. Although I must say, I feel like between the Lexington High School folks and Harry, I think we've summarized most of what I would have to offer as good advice. But let me just start by acknowledging something that I think we all kind of know, but I think is worth repeating. The last 60 years, we've gone through massive economic and social and political change in this country. And the way those changes have landed really differs by generation. The folks who are baby boomers who came of age in the 60s with its polarization and liberation, the Gen Xers who came of age in the Reagan era, our millennial friends who came of age with the George Bush presidency, the war in Iraq, and the financial crisis, and our Gen Zers who are coming of age in a country where a lot about the future is really in question, a lot about the climate is really in question. And so our lived experience of the last 60 years, the voting public today, is profoundly differentiated by how we've grown up in this country and the country we've grown up in. The economy has changed, and arguably in some ways not for the better. We're more economically divided than we have been since World War II. Socially, we're more segregated by income, by ideology. Racial segregation went down for a while. It's actually rising again. And we also have a demographic shift going on that's profound and significant to an increasingly non-white population in this country, and the non-white population is younger than the white population, and that's a real dynamic. And we see this playing out in our two political parties and their current alignments, that the Democrats are the party of the coasts, the educated professionals, the younger. It's a multiracial coalition. And the Republican Party is a predominantly white, much more rural and small city, much older coalition. And those differences really matter because they link up with a lot of challenges in the way that people's lives are playing out. So the parties are simultaneously reflections of those economic and social changes, and they reinforce them. And we are living with that reinforcement now. The ways in which I think our work as mediators and facilitators engages with that polarization are many, but let me just say briefly by way of explanation, the work that we do is as mediators and facilitators. So we're bringing diverse stakeholders together, people who have a stake in a public issue, often convened by a government agency, and sometimes by a nonprofit or by a foundation or by a business, and we're trying to work through a challenge together. So where should we site wind, offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine? So there are interests at stake in that issue. Lobstermen and fishermen are really worried about how this is going to affect their livelihood. But it's also a profound challenge that they are experiencing on top of some other government actions that have limited their opportunity to fish, that feels like a challenge to their way of life. And so what is partly a response to climate change and partly part of the energy transition that we're trying to go through is experienced there as also a political issue and a polarized political issue, where there are also political actors who are trying to make hay out of the Biden administration's crazy climate change agenda that is ruining the lives of fishermen in New England. And conversely, environmentalists who are furious that the political actors are giving too much leeway to those actors who are trying to stop a really important change from happening to get us to a renewable energy economy. So we get in the middle of situations like that, and we're trying to work with the stakeholders to clarify what they want to achieve, to explore options with them, and to see if there are ways to move forward. What I think has changed in our work over the last decade is the extent to which what used to be challenging enough interest-based negotiations, can we compensate the fishermen for the loss of livelihood? Can we site this offshore wind in a way that is perhaps slightly more expensive, but is going to allow for more fishing to take place? Are there ways that we can actually make the anchors for these offshore wind turbines into fish breeding grounds? All great stuff that's interest-based. Now, on top of that, though, we have to deal with polarization in the views of people toward each other. This sense that the environmentalists are not just a problem for our interests, we don't like them. They are bad people. They have this crazy agenda that we totally disregard. Or these fishermen are nut jobs. They don't understand what has to happen. They're totally retrograde and they're probably racist too. And I want to acknowledge that these are not views that people necessarily fully consciously express or endorse, but they're there, and we have to work with them in a constructive way. And so increasingly, going back to our colleagues from the high school and their great insights, we're working with relationship. We're working with helping to get to know the other people as people. Let's have dinner together the night before the meeting. Let's actually have environmentalists go out on fishing boats. Let's have the offshore wind folks present things through site walks that people can do together so that they can see what does an onshore assembly facility look like. So ways to connect people as people and to learn that, hey, we actually both like the Patriots, the New England Patriots, or that we're Italian food fans. These things matter for the ability to work together. So as we move forward in this work in our really challenging polarized society, we need to work on these core economic issues and on the social divisions. And I will just say to you that I think we have real opportunity. 2/3 of the country is not that divided. This is the work of the group More in Common, which does some of the best polling on American political public opinion, pointing out that we have two really loud wings, and we have 2/3 of the public, ranging from traditional liberals to moderates in their labeling, who actually are willing to compromise, willing to work on difficult issues to find common ground, and who are just being drowned out. But we misunderstand each other. Democrats assume that the average Republican is far more conservative than that person actually is, and vice versa. Republicans assume that the average Democrat is far more liberal than that person actually is. So we have both the opportunity and the challenge of actually getting to know what we really think each other across those lines. Finally, I'll just say that I think there are some things that are good ingredients to any of the processes that we work on. I would have said this 10 years ago, but I now think we need to say it more emphatically. Negotiation, interest-based negotiation, win-win negotiation, very essential to progress on these issues. But in addition, the work of trust building, the work of relationship building, that work which is not about negotiating, but is about understanding and hearing, being able to say, what I think I hear you say is, that's really important. Creativity, going way outside the box to find solutions that maybe nobody had thought of before, increasingly important, to break down the perception that there's no middle ground, that we can't find a way forward, and the possibility that we work through issues not just as negotiators around a table, but by doing things together. So early in a negotiation process now, we'll often have people think about whether they want to make a public statement about the fact that they're working together, or we'll have them go on a site visit. Things that just get them away from the table, out in the world, doing something together, which is just another opportunity to see that we can work together. So those 4 ingredients of negotiation, trust building, creativity, and working together are essential, I think, to making progress on these issues. I don't think that there is a recipe that follows neatly from those ingredients. We have to tailor how we do these things to each engagement. But I think we have lots of opportunity and lots of demonstrated commitment to achieve progress, even on some of the hardest things. The last thing I'll say is that working with members of Congress after the events of January 6, 2021, was both sobering and really inspiring in the sense that the idea was to have members of Congress who had been trying to work together in a bipartisan working group, but who were now completely divided and whose trust in each other had been completely destroyed by those events. How could they have a constructive conversation and come back together? So what we asked them to do was simply to first speak as individuals about their experience of the events of that day, and then ask from the other side, the other party, to just say what they had heard and acknowledge whatever they wanted to acknowledge about what they had heard. That was it. And it got very personal. One member talked about how after those events, she had gotten calls from the members of her family who were of her political party, but not calls from the members of her family who were of the other political party, and how intensely that hurt. Another member talked about how he had written his farewell letter, his goodbye letter, to his family while crouching in the well of the house. And different people, of course, had different perspectives on this personally and from a party perspective. but I think what happened was there was such a strong sense of shared humanity in sharing those experiences and people's perspectives on how they wanted to get back to working together, how important it was to demonstrate that this institution could work, that the Congress could work as a response to those events, that it was enough to get them past the difficulties that they had had and back to work. Obviously, they're back in it again in a new and exciting chapter. But I want to say that if members of Congress who have the most profound and extreme incentives to not get through these partisan divides can do it, I think the rest of us can too. So that gives me hope. Thank you.
Thank you, David. What I took from that, and hopefully you did too, was that first off, civility is necessary, but it is not sufficient, that we have to address real issues in multiple ways and in very honest ways, so we're not solving for the wrong problem. I love the idea of bringing together different stakeholders, right, that have different concerns, to see that maybe these concerns can help each other, right? What we're concerned about, it doesn't have to be an either or. And of course, it's going to come from a space of deep listening, really listening past it. And I loved what I felt was the idea of sitting down with people to break bread, eat a meal, right? It's difficult to hate somebody when they're feeding you, you know what I mean? And that the idea that Democrats believe that Republicans are more conservative than they actually are, and Republicans believe Democrats are more conservative than they actually are. And it ensconced in my mind this idea that we're not poles, but we're constellations, right? And if we speak to the constellation of the individual instead of the polar part that we perceive the individual is about, then maybe we have more success with that. So thank you for bringing that to us. Our last presenter is co-executive director and director of program development of Essential Partners. He teaches people how to facilitate dialogue across differences where they live, learn, and worship. Over more than 2 decades working with Essential Partners, John has facilitated dialogues on issues such as the role of guns in American life, police in the Black community, Israel and Palestine, interfaith relations between Muslims and Jewish people, human sexuality in the Christian church. With Essential Partners, he has helped found sustaining independent dialogue programs at universities, museums, and civic organizations across the country, and has also supported civic participation projects in Massachusetts, North Carolina, Florida, and Utah, among other locations. Will you please welcome our final presenter of the evening, John Saruf.
Thank you. It was a night similar to this a handful of years ago. I had a bunch of pizza boxes in one hand and flipped chart paper in the other hand, and I walked into a room filled with gun rights advocates. And I said, "Thank you for coming." The room got very quiet. And before I could really launch into the conversation, people started asking me questions. What is this about? Who's paying for this? Who do you think you are? Why are you doing this? I explained. This was shortly after yet another school shooting, and that a funder came forward and asked if we might do some dialogues around guns in America. And before we do any dialogues on any serious issue like that, we want to speak to stakeholders and people who live in their community and for whom this is a real issue. Well, I was told very quickly that I was wasting my time, that you can't have a dialogue with the other side. They don't listen. They just want to take away our guns. They don't understand us. They don't know the facts, and we can tell you the facts. I said, okay. I brought pizza. Would you just answer some questions? I'm not trying to convince you of anything, and you may be right. There may be no use to this. And so we opened the pizza, and I started asking questions. I asked, could you share one of your first informative experiences with guns growing up? And people talked about their grandparents, and they talked about their uncles. They talked about their mother who took them to the shooting range. They talked about a handed down firearm from a soldier from generations before. We asked if you could be understood by the other side in some way, what would you want them to understand? What do you wish you could understand about people who believe differently than you? What values do you feel like maybe you share together? Where are their differences? What question do you wish somebody would ask you about this? And after about an hour and a half, a woman raised her hand and she said, "Can we do this with the other side?" And I said, "Yes, but I heard at the beginning that that didn't feel useful or productive to you. What makes you think it might be useful and productive now?" And she said, "Well, if it's going to be like this, then I want to do it." And I said, "Well, what would it change? Why would it matter?" And she said, "I am so tired of feeling misunderstood. I am so tired of walking around my community feeling like I have to hide the things I believe or feeling like I don't belong here." I have had that conversation in the mapping of police and community conversations, in the mapping of abortion rights conversations, in the mapping of school funding conversations, over and over and over again. People are desperate to be understood and feel like they belong, to feel like the person that lives next to them that they see in the store every day doesn't look at them like they are some strange being from another world, where they might actually be able to have conversations and have some things that they believe in common. And yes, all of those statistics that we know about are real. And like you, I have hope. I have hope because of what you're all doing. I have hope because this is the level where people really feel the pain of polarization. And this is the level that can actually make a change. I am lucky enough to work for an organization that helps people just like you learn how to facilitate some of the most difficult conversations in a community, and have been able to teach people how to run programs where they can facilitate for each other, where students can facilitate for adults in having these difficult conversations all across the country. And I've done it in my own community in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where I live. We can have a conversation, we can have a fight about anything, right? Anything at all, we can divide ourselves. And if we played that out and stopped talking to one another about all of the things we disagree about, we would, each of us, be by ourselves, talking to ourselves about these things. And that's in some ways all we need, because the script has been written for us. We know what other people are going to say. So where I find hope and where I find belief is in communities like this, people like you. And when I'm asked to talk about this at a community, I often say, do you know who to turn to in your community when an issue arises? When somebody proposes a charter school, when somebody proposes to shut down 2 schools and build one and we're not sure where it's going to be, when somebody has a disagreement about which books are going to be in the library, when somebody has a disagreement about what to do, let's say, with affordable housing. Do you know who to turn to help support and design that conversation to invite people to really be seen, really be known for the things that they care about? Do they know enough to have a meal beforehand? Do they know enough to ask for a story and not just a position? So that in the best of times, when you have a decision to be made, you can be inclusive and creative and collaborative. In the worst of times, you can be resilient to that pull to dehumanize each other. One of our supporters asked me, he said, You know, I really appreciate what you do, training facilitators. This is great. It's important. And I'm watching the news, and I'm seeing forest fires just burning across the western United States. And I'm seeing polarization tear our communities apart. And I worry, John, that at Essential Partners, we're just training more firefighters, right? What are we really doing to change the way things are, the structures that need to be changed? And I had to think about that. That was a real big challenge. Not that there's anything wrong with training firefighters. We need them. What I realized is that we're not just training firefighters. We're not just training facilitators to help depolarize an individual conversation. What we're doing is reshaping the way our communities live together to be resistant to the next fire that comes. We're training people to learn the habit of turning towards each other when somebody makes a claim that dehumanizes somebody from the other side. We learn to say, let's have a conversation about this in our schools, in our PTO meetings. We know that we can call on certain people to come together. Our interfaith group can come together to help us have a conversation about the most important issues. We're not just putting out fires, we're changing the way we live together. We're changing the design of our communities so that we can live together in new ways, so that we know to stay curious with one another. We know to ask each other questions. We know to commune in different ways and tell each other stories. And so I just want to encourage you. And this is happening all over Massachusetts. It's happening all over the country. I get the good fortune of doing this in Wyoming and in Arkansas and in North Carolina and in Wellesley and in Watertown and in Gloucester and in Melrose and in Malden, starting conversation projects where people like you and where teachers like you are able to hold some of the most difficult conversations and invite people to be seen, truly seen and understood for who they want to be. So when asked about whether people understand who we are from the other side, so we believe that only 2/3 of people on the other side really believe and understand who we are. 4/5 of people will say, I understand what they are, right? On both sides, right? There's a gap in understanding who people really are and making space for that. That's something that an initiative like the Lyceum here, and thank you for bringing us together, that's what you as individuals can make a difference in doing. So I encourage you, learn these skills, make space for people at every single level of your community. Thank you.
Thank you, John. To what I really take as a call to action and a call to empathy, right? Much more of that, a call to empathy. The idea of what would you like people on the other side of your issue to know about you? And then the self-examination of what don't you know about them? And the idea of being inclusive and creative and collaborative, I think that's what you said. And for myself, what I heard in that was I need to resist this impulse I have to be a member of the congregation of the pre-offended. Right? I know there's some offense about to happen and I'm ready for it, you know? And so if I can resist that, perhaps I can be more creative in how I reach out to people. And I love the idea of people are desperate to be understood. Desperate to be understood and known for the things they care about and the things they want to be. Beautiful things. With that, I'd like to give a final round of applause to our panelists. Would you please give a round of applause for Catherine Manning, Carrie Dunn, Harry Forsdick, David Fairman, and John Saruf. Now, this is what this whole evening is about. What we're going to go into our next part is we're going to have a play date. All of us are going to convene into groups of 5 or 6. You can feel free to move your chairs around. Hopefully, you will be with someone who you don't know, at least somebody in your group who you do not know. And we're going to speak with each other for 20 minutes on some of what it was that we've heard. And we'll give you a 5-minute warning when we're at 5 minutes to be able to come back so we can have questions and maybe stand up and speak about the things we spoke in our group. There are guidelines in this that you brought with you, that you have with you. I'll just read them just so they're in your head. You might want to reread them. We need to share airtime to allow everyone to contribute. Extroverts may need to hold back a bit, and introverts may need to lean in a bit. Refrain from interrupting others, Reggie. Please listen with care to understand. That was my wife's voice. Please listen with care to understand, not to critique. Encourage yourself and others to think expansively. First draft thoughts are welcome here. We had to bumble and fumble before we learned to walk. Sometimes we have to take these things that are in the back of our heads, bring them to the front. It's going to take a little bit of time to get that language correct. So let's be kind. If someone says something that's a little bit offensive to us, let's just ask them, as we heard some of these skills, I'm sorry, is this what you mean? And then get clarity on that. And there are questions that we will be following in our breakout groups. Those are also in our brochures here. So let's convene ourselves as quickly as possible into groups of 5 or 6, and let's talk to each other. That we get to speak to the entire community, where you get your voices heard. You also have the chance to ask our panelists some questions. Just to remind myself and yourself perhaps what a question is something which is usually short, and it ends in the inflection upward at the end of said statement. Do not mistake it for a commentary disguised as a question. Please do not do that, because we have to get out of here in 15 minutes. So if there are questions, great, and if they're commentary, great. But please don't do that thing. I have a question, then do a 5-minute commentary, and then come with the question in 8 parts. So hopefully everyone got something, enjoyed, resonated with what we did in our 20-minute sort of session with each other, and I'm sure that you got something out of what our presenters gave us earlier. So if there are questions you want to ask, if there are comments you want to make about things you discussed, if you want to give them some feedback as to what you heard and what you took away, that would be great. And if I feel the necessity at times, I want to just see if I can clarify what you're saying and perhaps repeat it back to you so that we make sure we understand you correctly. So with that, is there anyone from, who has the microphone? Janelle has the microphone, yes. You're going to get your steps in today, Janelle, I can see that. And if you could say your name as well.
My name is, sorry about my voice, my name is Susan Almquist, and I want to thank the 2 teachers especially, gave me great help. I work in the Arlington school system, and I just want to know if we use a curriculum starting in K, because I don't believe in our grade schools have anything like this going on right now.
Well, she asked about if you have a curriculum starting in kindergarten? Right? Starting in kindergarten. Do you start with kindergarten?
The academic conversations,
Yeah, I don't know if it's a formal curriculum. It's definitely been from the ground up from the English language learner teachers, the English language teachers, working with our newcomers to give them the language and the skills to participate in classroom and academic conversations from like a literacy perspective, but also to build connections and collaboration and creative thinking and all of that. So I think it's, I could maybe ask you if you could speak to what's happening in the elementary schools, but it's definitely happening at the elementary schools now, but it's a newer initiative for sure. But it's not a formalized curriculum so much as it is kind of a set of.
Yeah, there's a lot of great guidance and books about the academic conversations. There's actually the ELL director for the Waltham Public Schools. It's a woman named Sarah Hammerwood. Has a book called Academic Conversations, and it's aimed at teaching elementary students, and it's fantastic. And so lots of resources on that topic for any school district.
Yeah, Jeff Swears and Hammerwood, have books together and separately on these topics.
Thank you. That's good to know. Yes, please. Sir, what's your name?
Gray Watson. So I don't do this very often in terms of like mediation, but I would love to have a little crib notes in my back pocket that I could sort of whip out and say, right, I need to listen, I need to. Do you guys have some recommendations? Or some like a little, like a reference that you could point us to somehow?
He was asking about crib notes,
Yeah.
things that, maybe something online. Or, yeah.
So, I think there's a book that I think everyone should read. It's called Getting to Yes. It's the most basic. For mediation, there is a great book written in 1986, still the best book in the field, by Chris Moore, called The Mediation Process. Only problem is it's long, but my God, is it good. In terms of crib notes, there are several sites that have some resources on them, but because I'm mostly in the public dispute space, Gray, I'm not that good at like just basic mediation. But I think give me time, and I will get to you something good on that level. But I think starting with Chris Moore, the mediation process is a great way to go.
Well, maybe the three of you might. I was going to ask you, John, if you want to maybe speak up too about that. Give us maybe 3 things that we can carry away.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
might
our
help us.
website, not to plug the organization.
No, please do.
But, okay. There we go. It's whatisessential.org. It's an open source, it used to be called the Public Conversations Project, founded by Maggie Herzig here with fellows, with 3 or 4 other wonderful folks, and so many resources on there, couple-page dialogue guides on simple issues that are really, really useful, good questions for difficult conversations. I'll email them to the Lyceum. I'll email a bunch of links to the Lyceum people, and then y'all can put them on the website or something.
Thank you.
And let me just plug the book Difficult Conversations as well. One of the
Thank
all-time greats.
Yes. Thank you both for that. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Sir. Hi, Catherine Roy. My question is there a way to start a conversation with someone who's basically saying, no, everything that you read is by people who are biased and not fact-based, and they just negate everything that I would think about. But I try and start a question, but I just get flattered.
Everyone hear that?
And I just offered that. I think the way to start is mostly to ask and to listen. So before I tell you anything about what I think about this, I'm actually really curious, what do you think about this? Tell me. Tell me a lot, if you want. And as I listen, what I want to be doing is really trying to understand and trying to shut down the debate factory that is otherwise going to run, and just see if I can first get to, okay, so you think this because that, and it connects to this other thing that's really important to you. So again, back to our great teaching advice from our teachers, am I understanding that right? Once people start to feel heard, they become more interested in hearing what you think. But first, you need to feel heard. I mean, I think John put this out very, very well, that it's incredibly powerful. There's this super sad thing that David Brooks said in an interview the other day that I heard, that 2/3 of people go through their lives without ever being asked to sort of tell what's most important that's happened to you in your life. Like, people don't get asked. And that's a really profound thing, right? Not to be asked. What's happened in your life that's been really important to you? And when they are asked, it's almost an overwhelming experience. So just to emphasize, I would just go there for a start.
Thank you. Getting back to that, people are desperate to be listened to. Right. Anyone else? Yes, front row.
I know this is opening a whole other can of worms and wasn't exactly
So
what
let's go fishing.
the conversation was about, but a lot of what you talked about was things that we can do when we get in a room together. And Harry, yours is a little bit different, but we still all live in the same town. But I'm wondering, because so much of the polarization and divisiveness happens online these days, what, not to take it too far from the conversation, but how does some of what you've said translate? What can you do in online conversations?
I'm really a sort of data collector more than a theoretician on what to do with it. I can tell you what I've seen is the people on the Lex Rel list don't get into arguments.
Yeah.
They're skilled at, I guess, either saying what they want to say and then shutting their computer off, or because there aren't that many large back and forth conversations on the Lex Rel list. The real problem is when it goes over to the Lexington list and people start getting surprised with what they're reading, and they react emotionally to what they're reading, and they forget all the rules of the list. I can't tell you how many times I repeated to people all the rules about the Lexington list, which is more regulated than the Lex Rel list. So there's something, I don't know, I mean, I was even just thinking as I was listening to the answer there, what happens if I start listening to you and I don't get any reciprocal? What do you think about it? I feel very, well, come on, run over me. Because I do have an opinion. I'd like to know why you believe you have the right to do whatever. And are you going to ask me back the same question, please?
But they almost always do. I mean, to your point.
That was a very interesting point.
Curiosity begets curiosity. When I've gotten to tell my story, now I'm curious about yours. If I've gotten to talk to you. And your answer, which is beautiful, is the same online. We did a national conversation on guns, brought people together from around the country at the museum during the March for Our Lives, which was a fascinating juxtaposition, and sent them home to have conversations on Facebook, which was all right for a while, but then they introduced more people who hadn't been together, and it started to explode. But the answer is stay curious, which is harder to do in print because I can read it. If I'm vigilant, I'll read your question as a gotcha question, even if it's genuinely curiously asked. But I'm listening for what are you trying to do here? And so, stay in the relationship, stay in the person, the personal conversation about it. Where did this come from? The conversation about your lens that you both talked about, help me understand the lens you bring to this conversation is huge. Once I begin to understand that, even if we fundamentally disagree, if I can understand the lens you bring and why you bring it, it changes my reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. I would just quickly add, I think a lot of the ground rules points that Harry made are really valid and powerful on social media, and there's a ton of work going on now on the major platforms, on Facebook, to a lesser extent on X or Twitter, around not just sort of trying to promote civility, but actually changing the design and the architecture and the functionality so that it's not just a like, but there's actually a response button that's tell me more. There's a lot going on right now to try to figure out better ways to get out of the hellscape that a lot of people find themselves in. And there's also this movement to alternative platforms. I am not plugging any alternative platforms, but part of what is going on is that people are just exhausted with what they're exposed to, and they're trying to find platforms where the moderation and the ground rules are a little stronger and simpler, and where there's more opportunity for smaller groups with not anonymity. And a last point, anonymity is super important if you're a human rights activist in Syria, but that's not what we're talking about here. So it's really, where is the anonymity absolutely necessary, and where is it absolutely the wrong way to go?
Absolutely. Thank you. Maybe we have time for one more, maybe two more. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Tish Callahan, and I was just thinking, is there a timing and a place? Is there an appropriate timing and place? I was just thinking, I was playing tennis this morning, we got into this conversation, and she's Israeli, it was very heated, and I said, oh, the Palestinians, and it just got very, wow, very emotional. And so then I was thinking and reflecting on it. Obviously it wasn't appropriate time to go to continue it, but to say, well, let's get together for coffee, is there, and talk about it. I'd love to hear more about your perspective. I know my mother never talked, she always talked to my father when she wanted something after dinner.
Sounds right.
And she brought him tea and blah, blah, then she would hit him. So there's timing, I just said the appropriate time and the place,
Do you have a question?
the
Tish?
context. No, but I'm
Yes, I did not hear an interrogative in that.
So can you comment on timing and the appropriateness of place?
Yeah, so I want to know, because you said now is not the time, right? When is and how do you?
Yeah,
how
that's
do you
like,
judge it?
and this is tough. It's a really tough thing. And teachers are really nervous about teaching about this, but they kind of feel they should, and it's the right thing to do. And I think, like, right now, where we are, I saw a teacher actually do a wonderful lesson today, and he's, in our department, he is an officer in the U.S. Army National Guard, military intelligence. He's as nervous as can be about a potential deployment right now. So he's got that hanging like a cloud over his head, basically. And he wanted to teach about this, and nobody could have more training like about this topic than him. But we went through like every slide he wanted to show, the template he was going to have students fill out, and like the opportunity for them to share a perspective at the end. And we walked through it, and it went really, really well. I would say with confidence, like every kid in his classes knows a little bit more, right, about the topic from reliable sources right now, and the groundwork is laid for a time, I hope, in the future, where that conversation can be a little more open and a little more verbal. I still worry right now, again, about a kid saying something that like deeply harms somebody else's experience, identity, and then the kid who says it following them socially for a long, long time. But I don't know that that's going to be the case forever. I don't think it will. I hope it isn't.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think, I just want to add, I think, like, to your point about inviting somebody else, I think there are difficult conversations that are had at our school and in communities, and many of you are here, that we're opting into because we want to participate in the conversation, and we're in a place that we want to listen or we want to engage. And I think there are certain topics, to Carrie's point, that there are kids in the room that aren't ready to have that conversation. Right. There's a lot of emotion on in 2021 with Russian invasion of Ukraine. That was another one where you're like, ooh, okay, what am I about to do? There's a lot of emotion in the room. So being able to, I think, be in a place where kids can maybe opt into conversations, or your friend that say, do you want to go out and talk more? And she might say no, and then she's opted out of the conversation. It's not the time to have the conversation. So I think offering that opportunity, but there are certain topics at school that are discussed, and we allow kids to participate if they want to participate. So not every kid's ready to have some conversations, nor adults, but giving them the chance to be part of it, I think, is at least a gesture. And
Right, at least they haven't felt shut down.
yeah, like, hey, I want to
And
hear
not
your
listened
voice.
to.
If you're not ready, that's okay, but I'll come back.
Maybe something like a Lyceum. Well said. Okay, so with that, what I would like to do is I would like to give a final round of applause to our panelists, please. Catherine Manning, Carrie Dunn, David Fairman, John Farouk, and Harry Forsdick. My name is Reggie Gibson. Thank you for letting me be a part of this tonight. And please let us bring up Janelle to close us out.
So I want to thank our wonderful moderator as well as our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us this evening. And I'd also like to thank all of you for taking part in this conversation, because you were very much a part of it and what we want the Lyceum to be. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Lexington Observer. We have Lauren Feeney here, and also the Lexington Human Rights Committee. And we have Christina Lynn from that committee back there. I'll remind you, there is information about our organizations at the back of the room. So remember this. If you would like, if you would fill this out for what words and phrases might come to mind after you've heard the panelists, that would be great as well, and we'll create some word clouds and we will share them with you. Please, you can turn them in to Meg over here. She is gesturing. I would also like to point out that in your program we have a list of events that are sponsored by both the Lexington Lyceum Advocates and the Human Rights Committee. And that includes a workshop, an interactive workshop that is being offered by one of our panelists, John Saroof, and his former colleague at Essential Partners, Maggie Herzig, right here. And if you are interested in this conversation and want to learn more about having these difficult conversations, I hope you will join us at that event. It's on November 8th, right here in the community center. And with that, I will say thank you again, and have a good night.
Thank you.